It's time for a spotlight on AI and a forecast where it goes from here. In fact, some new data and studies from Futurum, and right now we have Steve Dickens with us, VP and practice lead at the Futurum Group. And I know that you have some new data never publicized before for us here today in this conversation. What are some of the themes that you've been seeing, and what about this research?
Nicole, thank you for having me on the show. We've published some new research today. Total annual software and AI cloud compute revenue will reach 182.2 billion by 2027. That's a 22.6% CAGR from the numbers we saw of 65.7 billion last year. Obviously the AI market's exploding. We've got a big earnings week this week with Microsoft and Google reporting. So I'm expecting those CAGR and TAM numbers to start to reflect in their earnings.
Right, unbelievable. So you see this growth happening. You said 182.2 billion going forward. And what names are the names that keep popping up when it comes to these types of topics when you talk about cloud and AI?
Well, obviously you've got the big names. We've got Microsoft and Google reporting tomorrow. Obviously NVIDIA's part of that equation, but we're seeing it across the entire sector. We're seeing, I was out with Splunk last week, got a chance to speak to Gary Steele, their CEO.
Interesting.
They made some key announcements. I published an article on Forbes today talking about what they're doing in that space. I was with Antonio Neri from HPE just a few weeks ago, and the team at Lenovo.
Yeah,
also,
sure.
We're seeing all those names benefit from the tailwinds of AI.
So as we await earnings from Alphabet and Microsoft this week, are you likely expecting some good news?
I think so. I mean, obviously, AI is still relatively new,
right,
to reflect in this quarter's earnings. I'm expecting there to be a lot of mentions of the word AI on those earnings calls. I don't think there's any surprise there. I think some of the stuff we saw last week from Microsoft around pricing for some of their Copilot, that's going to be interesting. They were announced pricing at $30. Market consensus was at $20. So I think that's going to be interesting. I think for me, it's laying in the foundations this quarter, and then I see it accretive in coming quarters. You
said you've already seen some signs. You look at something like IBM. What's the takeaway from something like IBM?
So IBM reported last week, beat consensus estimates, relatively flat from a revenue point of view, but earnings per share was up. I think they made some announcements a few months ago now with Watson X, which we've been tracking. I think what they're doing is indicative of where the sector's going to go in general around enterprise AI.
Weren't they the first, right? Remember Watson, right? I mean, I remember scratching my head at that time and saying, look at this. And now we've got Watson X and so much more. When you talk about the different economic sectors where you expect to see some growth, you have leading and lagging sectors going forward. And this is over probably a year, 2 years, 5 years. Which ones are likely to lead?
I think financial services, telco, you're going to see retail. It's going to be interesting to see Google's numbers this week as a lead indicator for where we're seeing the advertising space. I think those are probably the sectors I would see. We've got some details in our report that goes into that in more detail, but that's fresh off the press, so I don't have those committed to memory yet.
No, I see them here. You gave them to us. Telecom, healthcare, business services, auto and aerospace, retail, financial services. On the downside, industrials, real estate, construction, food and beverage. Food and beverage? I thought everybody wanted to get out there, and logistics and energy.
Well, I think it's going to be a challenge. All these tools are there. The speed of the cloud providers, we're going to see that with Microsoft and Google. The speed to bring AI to market. Some of those sectors are going to benefit earlier. Others are going to take longer to adopt.
What about someone like Elon Musk? Are people betting too much on the players as opposed, when they look at someone like Elon Musk, or they look at what's going on with Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, or things like that?
Well, there's always a cult of personality. I think if I was to talk about where Elon's portfolio of companies are, obviously lots of media attention around the X. He came out with XAI. What was that, a couple of weeks ago? I think Tesla's got a huge corpus of data from its autonomous driving and cameras that it can leverage. So I think there's going to be some interesting things ahead there. You mentioned Jensen from NVIDIA. they're on a tear right now.
On a tear.
I mean, I can't see that changing over the next 18 months.
Likely to be a very popular baby name, from what I understand, right? After what we've seen with what has gone on. That being said, are you worried about anything, or are there any surprises here? Because when you talk about this growth trajectory for cloud and AI to be exploding, are you worried about anything in particular?
Well, I think obviously everybody's worried about regulation. We're going to see that start to on the horizon, I think. Maybe in Europe first. I would think they've got a more regulatory heavy framework than we do here in the US. So I think maybe that's a headwind. But I think from what we're seeing and our numbers and the research that we've conducted,
right,
it's only tailwinds for the big names from here.
Yeah, I mean, you said it's all for AI, cloud computing, software. Overall, that's the big picture. Steve, final thought? You had a final thought?
I think it's some of the OEMs as well, the HPEs, the Lenovos, the Dells. I think they're also going to benefit from this tailwind. It's not just the public cloud providers.
Stephen Dickens, thank you so much. Great to see you, of the Futurum Group. Thanks for being here.
Thank
Great
you so
stuff,
much.
Really. It just shows it's going to keep on going. So we know the AI boom has been hot, and it seems like it won't stop.